I never imagined my own son's wedding would end with my cheek burning and the whole room pretending not to stare. But that's exactly how it happened. One moment I was adjusting the sleeves of my old suit, trying to look presentable, and the next my new daughter-in-law, Lorna, stepped toward me and slapped me hard enough to make the champagne glasses tremble. "Give me the keys to your house, Everett," she snapped, her voice sharp and cold. "We're moving in. Tonight." My son Rowan didn't defend me. He didn't even raise his head. He just stood there like a statue carved out of embarrassment and cowardice. And that hurt far worse than the slap. At my age, shame hits deeper. It crawls into the places you thought life had already hardened. For a moment, I couldn't speak, not because I was scared, but because I knew that if I opened my mouth, the anger would pour out and never stop. You learn something with age. Silence can be heavier than shouting, and twice as sharp. And in that strange quiet, with my cheeks still throbbing, I murmured the words that keep me going. Subscribe, hit the like button, and tell me in the comments how old you are and where you're from. For you, it's just a small thing, but for me, it's the reason I keep telling these stories. But Marla, my wife, didn't stay silent. She stepped between us like she'd been waiting for that exact moment. Her voice was calm, almost soft, but it carried through the hall like a bell. "You just signed your own sentence, dear," she told Lorna, steady and sure. The room froze. Even the band seemed to lose its rhythm for a beat. Then Marla took my arm and guided me out of that hall as if we were leaving a fire someone else had started. Outside, the cold evening air felt cleaner than anything inside. We sat in the car for a moment, letting the quiet settle around us. And then my phone started buzzing again. 30 missed calls. And one name among them I never expected to see that night. When I finally unlocked my phone, the glow of the screen lit up the car like a tiny stage light. And for a second, I felt ridiculous, an old man squinting at notifications as if they held the meaning of life. 30 missed calls, all from inside that hall. But the one sitting at the bottom, the one that made my stomach twist, was from Rowan. My son had apparently found his voice only after we left. Typical. When I needed him to speak, he was quieter than a church mouse. When I walked out, suddenly, he dialed like a telemarketer on commission. Marla watched me from the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly over her clutch. "He'll say it was a misunderstanding," she murmured. "They always do when the room empties and the bills come due." I smirked despite myself. She wasn't wrong. Then, in my brilliant attempt to look calm and collected, I tried to toss my phone onto the dashboard, except it slid off, bounced off my knee, and somehow ended up wedged under the seat. Marla raised an eyebrow. "Smooth," she said, very dignified. I muttered something about gravity having it out for older men, but humor didn't stop the ache that settled somewhere deep inside me. I kept replaying the slap, the demand, the silence of my own son. I've lived long enough to know betrayal doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it walks in wearing a wedding gown, and yet, beneath the humiliation, something else flickered, something stubborn. Maybe pride, maybe anger, maybe the simple refusal to let a girl half my age dictate the roof over my head. I finally retrieved the phone after a minor battle with the seat rails and stared at Rowan's name again. My thumb hovered above the callback button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. Not yet. Not while the sting on my cheek reminded me of how everything had unfolded just an hour earlier. Marla touched my hand. "Drive," she said quietly. "Where we go next is up to us, not them." And as the engine rumbled awake, I realized something unsettling. The night wasn't spiraling out of control. It was lining up for a confrontation I'd been avoiding for years. Rowan's choices, his loyalty, his silence tonight would expose all of it. And the moment we turned out of the parking lot, headlights flashed behind us, matching our speed, closing in fast. The headlights behind us stayed glued to my bumper so closely, I started wondering whether I'd accidentally become a parade float. I tapped the brake once, not to be petty, just to check if the driver was awake. But the car behind us immediately flashed its high beams, like an annoyed lighthouse. Marla sighed. "That's Rowan," she said. "Only he tailgates like that and thinks it's subtle." I wanted to laugh, but there was a knot in my chest I couldn't shake. Part of me wished he'd stay back at the hotel and deal with the chaos he helped create. Another part, an older, foolish part, still hoped he'd show up with an apology big enough to fill the space between us. But the truth is, Rowan hadn't given a real apology since he was 8, when he broke my fishing rod and blamed the fish. When we stopped at a red light, he rolled down his window and stuck out an arm, waving frantically as if he were directing airplanes. I cracked my window 2 inches, the official dad boundary for unwanted conversations. "Dad, wait! Please!" he shouted. The light turned green, and I rolled the window right back up. Maybe it was petty, maybe even childish, but it felt unbelievably good. Marla pressed her lips together, trying not to smile. "Mature behavior from both generations tonight," she said. I shrugged. If he wanted maturity, he should have raised me better. Even she snorted at that one. But beneath the jokes, something splintered inside me. I kept asking myself the same question. When did my own boy start treating us like burdens instead of parents? Was it something we missed? Something we forgave too easily? Or had he simply learned to bend toward the loudest voice in his life? And right now, that voice was Lorna's? A hollow ache settled in my chest as we turned onto our street. Even the porch lights of the neighboring houses looked different tonight, colder somehow. Like the world was holding its breath. Rowan's car followed us all the way to our driveway. I put the gear shift in park and sat there, hands on the wheel, feeling the weight of every year, every sacrifice, every quiet moment when we'd hoped Rowan was becoming the man we raised him to be. Then, before I could decide whether to get out or drive somewhere far enough to confuse even my GPS, Rowan stepped out of his car and started running toward Arsty, crooked jacket missing, panic written all over his face. And that was the first moment I realized he wasn't chasing us just to apologize. Something else had cracked open behind him. Rowan ran toward us like a man who finally realized gravity applies to his decisions too. His shoes slapped against the pavement, and for a moment I thought he might fall straight onto our lawn. Wouldn't be the first time he did that. Though usually it was after Thanksgiving wine. He reached the car just as I opened my door, bent over with his hands on his knees, gasping like he'd just sprinted a marathon he never trained for. "Dad, wait, please don't go inside," he wheezed. I raised an eyebrow. "Rowan, son, this is my house. Where exactly am I supposed to go? The neighbor's bushes?" Marla shot me a look, but even she couldn't hide the twitch of a smile. He straightened up, face red, hair messy, tie hanging like a sad piece of spaghetti. "Lornasha's furious we didn't know you were leaving. Look, this got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated. "She slapped me at your wedding, Rowan. That's not out of hand. That's out of her mind." For a heartbeat, he didn't argue. That silence finally felt like honesty leaking through a crack. But then he rubbed his forehead, the same way he used to when he forgot his homework. "Dad, we didn't mean to push you, I swear. Lorna just..." she thought. "Oh, I know exactly what she thought," I said. "She thought she could claim my home like it was a party favor." Marla stepped out of the car, adjusting her shawl with that quiet grace she uses right before she says something that ends the conversation. "Rowan, your wife crossed a line tonight," she said gently, but firmly. "Your father and I will not pretend otherwise just to keep the peace." Rowan looked between Ush's parents on one side, the wedding hall disaster echoing on the other. And for the first time in years, I saw fear in his eyes. Not the childish kind, the adult kind. The one that comes when a person realizes they can't control the consequences they've unleashed. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then looked up at our front porch like it held the answers he didn't have. "Please don't lock me out," he said quietly. She's already on her way here." Marla and I exchanged a glance. A long, heavy one, because if Lorna was coming here, to our house, after everything that just happened then, the real confrontation hadn't started yet. It was about to walk up our driveway in heels. I don't know what I expected when Lorna's car finally screeched into our driveway, something dramatic, maybe. But nothing prepared me for the sight of her storming out in that wedding dress, bundled in Rowan's tux jacket, like a runaway bride who took a wrong turn and ended up in a driveway she didn't pay for. She stomped toward us, heels sinking into the grass. muttering something that sounded like legal threats mixed with bad perfume. Rowan stiffened. "Lorna, please, just—" She cut him off with a raised hand. "No, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to them." I leaned slightly toward Marla. "You think she practiced that in the mirror?" Marla whispered. "If she did, the mirror probably tried to leave too." But jokes aside, my pulse thudded. My own home suddenly felt foreign, like its quiet walls were bracing for an earthquake. Lorna pointed at our porch. "We are moving in tonight," she declared, her voice trembling with entitlement rather than fear. "You can't keep what should belong to Rowan and me." I felt something old and stubborn rise in me, something I thought age had worn dull. But instead of shouting, I cleared my throat and said, "Well, before you move into a house, you should probably know where we keep the spare key." Her eyes narrowed with triumph. I continued, "Unfortunately for you, I forget where I put it every other week. So, good luck." Rowan slapped a palm over his face. Marla pressed her lips to hide a smile. But Lorna wasn't amused. "You think this is funny?" she barked. "You owe us this house." And somehow, hearing those words, "you owe us," snapped something in me cleaner than bone. No more confusion. No more doubt. No more excuses for Rowan's silence or her arrogance. I stepped closer, meeting her glare. "I owe you nothing," I said. "Not tonight. Not ever." Her breath hitched. Rowan's shoulders sagged. Marla gently touched my wrist, a quiet signal that everything I'd been holding back had finally found its shape. And right then, right in the center of that tense triangle, Marla exhaled softly. And the shift in her posture told me the story was about to change hands entirely. Because from this moment on, the voice in our home would no longer be mine. It would be hers.
When Everett stepped back and let me move forward, I felt something settle in my chest, something steady, old, and familiar. I've spent years smoothing the edges of this family, patching over the cracks, making peace where there was none. But that night, staring at the girl who had just struck my husband, I realized peace was no longer an option anyone deserved from me. Lorna stood there on our lawn, shivering in a jacket that wasn't hers, glaring like a queen whose crown had slipped. "You need to understand," she said. "Rowan and I deserve a place to start our life. Your house is the logical choice." I smiled gently. The kind of smile older women use when they're deciding whether to laugh or lecture. "My dear," I said softly, "a logical choice would have been not slapping the man who owns the house." Everett coughed beside me, one of those coughs that tries very hard to hide a laugh. But I wasn't laughing. I watched Rowan. Poor boy. He stood there wringing his hands like a child who'd lost his mittens, muttering apologies that never made it past his lips. And suddenly I could see the truth clearer than the porch light shining on us. He wasn't the villain tonight. He was the rope being pulled from both ends. Still, pity has its limits, especially when someone tries to shove you out of your own home. Lorna stepped closer to me. "You can't keep holding on to everything. You and Everett have had your time. Now it's ours." Ah, there it was. The quiet cruelty of youth, almost elegant in its ignorance. I reached up and adjusted the collar of Everett's jacket on her shoulders. "Careful," I murmured. "You're trembling." "Cold nights aren't kind to people with thin skin." She jerked away. Everett snorted. Rowan looked like he wanted to sink into the soil. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. The anger in me wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was simply awake. "You say this house should belong to you because you're starting your life," I told her. "But a home isn't handed to you like a wedding favor. It's earned, brick by brick, year by year, and you haven't earned a single breath inside it." For the first time, her face faltered. Her confidence cracked, not loudly but like a hairline fracture in glass. "Marla," Rowan whispered. "Please, just let's talk inside." "No," I said. "We are talking right here, under the light, so everyone sees the truth for what it is." And just as I said it, our porch light flickered, buzzed, and went out completely, leaving us in a dramatic darkness so perfectly timed even Everett muttered, "Well, that's not ideal." But the darkness didn't stop me. It only made my next words sharper. Because now, with no lights and nowhere for anyone to hide, the real conversation could finally begin. The moment that porch light died, the whole yard shifted. Lorna froze mid-breath. Rowan whispered something that sounded like a prayer to the electrical gods, and Everett, bless his soul, started patting his pockets for a flashlight he absolutely did not have. I bought one last week, he muttered. Or, I meant to buy one. I definitely thought about buying one. Even in the dark, I could feel Lorna's impatience radiating like cheap perfume. Can we please go inside, she snapped. It's embarrassing standing out here. Embarrassment requires an audience, I replied calmly. All I see is family and one burned-out bulb. But the dark did something interesting. It made every voice sharper, every breath louder, every truth harder to hide. Rowan shifted closer to me. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't think she'd, slap Dad. That's the problem, sweetheart, I said. You didn't think at all. He flinched just slightly, but enough for me to feel the fault line forming beneath his feet. Everett finally stopped rummaging and whispered, if someone steps in that garden hose, it wasn't me who left it there. A second later, he stepped in it and nearly went down like a folding chair. I caught his sleeve and steadied him while he muttered something about untrustworthy hoses. But even those small moments couldn't soften what needed to be said next. Lorna, I began, turning toward where her silhouette hovered, rigid and defiant. You think this house is a trophy? A prize? Something you can claim because you married our son? And why shouldn't it be? She shot back. You've had your years in it. We deserve a start. Deserve, I repeated. Such a fashionable word. Comes in all styles. Usually worn by people who've never carried weight heavier than their own wishes. She scoffed. You're just too attached to the past. No, I said. I'm attached to dignity. And to the idea that someone should show a little respect before demanding a key. Rowan tried again, voice cracking. Mom, please. Let's all sit down and breathe. We will, I said softly. But not while pretending Lorna's behavior is normal. The wind picked up then, rustling the leaves, tugging at Lorna's borrowed jacket until it slipped off one shoulder. Her confidence slipped with it. And that was when she played her trump card, the one she thought would end all arguments. Rowan told me, she said boldly, that when you two are gone, this house will be ours anyway. So what difference does it make if we take it now? Everett stiffened beside me. Rowan's breath caught. And inside me quietly, without drama, something ancient and sharp clicked into its final position. This wasn't just entitlement. This was planning. This was expectation. This was a future she had already drawn without us in it. And if she wanted to speak about the future, then now, finally, it was time I told her something she never saw coming. Her words hung in the dark like a cold draft slipping under a door. When you two are gone, this house will be ours anyway. She said it so easily, so casually, as if our lives, our years, our breaths, were just stepping stones for her convenience. I felt Everett beside me straighten his back slowly, stiffly, like a man preparing to deliver a sermon he never thought he'd have to give. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, realizing this moment was mine. Good man. Even in chaos, he knows when to hand me the floor. Lorna, I said quietly, do you know what surprises me most? Not your greed. Not your disrespect. It's your confidence. The confidence to assume a future you haven't earned. She scoffed again, crossing her arms. Oh, please. Don't make this dramatic. If you think this isn't dramatic, Everett muttered, you clearly haven't watched yourself tonight. But I kept my gaze on her shadowed outline. You want the truth? I asked. Fine, you'll have it. The house isn't going to you. Rowan breathed out sharply. Mom, wait. No, I said. You deserve to hear the full story. I stepped closer, letting the darkness wrap around us like a curtain before the reveal. Last year, after Everett's health scare, you remember it, I'm sure you suggested we downsize and consider retiring somewhere cheaper. We didn't tell you then, but that conversation pushed us to make a decision. Lorna shifted her weight. What decision? We changed the will, I said plainly. This house no longer passes to you or Rowan. Silence. Real, trembling silence. Even the crickets seemed to freeze. Rowan made a sound like someone had poked him in the ribs with the truth. Mom. Why? I turned to him gently. Because a home is more than walls. It's respect. It's care. It's family. And neither of you has shown any of that tonight. Lorna stepped forward, outrage radiating off her like a broken hairdryer. You can't do that. You can't just take it away. Everett, bless him, cleared his throat and announced, "Actually, legally, we absolutely can." And we did. Then he added quietly, "Twice, because the lawyer messed up the first copy." I elbowed him lightly. "Not helping," he whispered. "Just providing context." Rowan looked at the ground, defeated. "But Lorna," oh, she wasn't done. She wasn't built to retreat. "You think you can punish us?" she snapped. "You think old age gives you the right to play games with people's lives?" I took another step toward her, close enough to smell the wedding perfume she'd chosen to impress everyone but herself. "No," I said. "Old age gives us perspective. And tonight, my dear, perspective is all you're getting." But then, just as I thought she'd finally quiet down, Lorna did something none of us expected. She reached into her purse, still wearing it over the wedding dress, like a chaotic accessory, and pulled out a bundle of papers. "I knew you'd try something like this," she declared triumphantly. "That's why I prepared my own plan." And for the first time that night, I felt a chill run down my spine. She held that stack of papers the way a gambler holds the last card they believe will save the night. Even in the dark, I could see the white edges tremble in her hands, whether from anger or hope, I couldn't tell. Rowan swallowed loudly, the kind of gulp he used to make as a child right before admitting he'd broken something we couldn't afford to replace. Everett leaned closer to me and whispered, "If it's a recipe, I'm leaving. I can only handle one disaster at a time." It wasn't a recipe. Of course it wasn't. Lorna lifted the papers and announced, "I had a real estate friend draft a cohabitation agreement. If you two had any decency, you'd sign it and let us move in while we help maintain the place." Everett muttered, "Help maintain?" "She killed our porch light by glaring at it." I nudged him, though I didn't disagree. "Lorna," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady, "you want us to sign a contract giving you residency in a home you don't own and haven't contributed a single dollar or memory to." "Yes," she said proudly, as if she'd solved world peace. "And what exactly do you offer in return?" "Stability," she said. "Support. A future that includes all of us." Everett let out a noise halfway between a laugh and a sneeze. "Oh, I'm allergic to nonsense," he explained when everyone looked at him. But beneath all the absurdity, something heavier sat in my chest. Not anger. Not even betrayal. Just a deep, aching disappointment at how little she understood love, family, or legacy. She didn't see a home. She saw a shortcut. I took the papers from her hand not because I planned to sign but because I wanted to see what fantasy looked like on official letterhead. And oh, it was rich. The agreement claimed Rowan and Lorna would take over caretaking responsibilities, though Rowan hadn't watered a plant since the Clinton administration. It also suggested Everett and I consider transitioning to a smaller living arrangement at our convenience. My convenience? The only thing convenient here was how quickly my patience was evaporating. "Lorna," I said finally, "this isn't a cohabitation agreement. This is a polite eviction notice. For us." She didn't deny it. That was the moment something final and cold settled inside me like the thud of a locked door. Rowan stepped forward. "Mom, please, just listen. We didn't mean for it to come out like this." "Oh, it didn't come out," I said gently. "It spilled. All over the life we built." And then unexpectedly, impossibly, Lorna lunged forward to snatch the papers from my hand. But she misjudged her steps, tripped over Everett's abandoned garden hose, and went flying across the yard with a shriek dramatic enough to wake the neighbors. If the night had a sense of humor, it was a dark one, but the thud of her fall silenced even Everett's urge to comment. Because when she sat up, grass in her hair, and fury in her eyes, she pointed at me, not him, not Rowan, me, and screamed, "You are the reason this family is falling apart." And those words hit a place even a slap couldn't reach. Her accusations sliced through the night sharper than anything she'd swung before. "You are the reason this family is falling apart." For a moment, everything stilled. Rowan frozen, Everett holding his breath, even the wind pausing as if waiting for my reaction. I felt the weight of her words settle on my shoulders, not because they were true, but because they revealed exactly how blind she was to the wreckage she had created. I stepped toward her slowly, calmly, like a teacher approaching a child who hadn't yet learned the value of listening. She scrambled to her feet, brushing grass from her dress, her eyes blazing with the kind of anger that burns bright but burns out quickly. "Lorna," I said softly, "families don't fall apart because someone stands up. They fall apart because someone stops caring." She opened her mouth to argue, but I lifted a hand. You wanted this house. You demanded it. You slapped my husband at his own son's wedding, and then expected gratitude. And worst of all, you mistook our age for weakness. Everett finally stepped up beside me, his voice steady. If Marla is the reason anything is falling apart, it's because she stopped holding the pieces together for people who refuse to learn. He said it with a gentleness that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Rowan broke then right there in the yard. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't stop her. I didn't protect you. I didn't. You didn't choose. I finished for him. And tonight choosing matters." For the first time he nodded. Really nodded. With understanding instead of reflex. Lorna, however, was far from surrender. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll make sure everyone knows what you did tonight." "Good," I said. "Tell them. Tell them you demanded a home that wasn't yours. Tell them you struck a man who offered you nothing but kindness. Tell them you tried to bully two people twice your age into giving up their life." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "And while you're at it, tell them you fell on my hose." "Accuracy matters," Everett whispered. "Thank you for mentioning the hose. It's important for closure." I elbowed him. But the moment of comedy eased the tension just enough. Lorna looked between the two of us, realizing, perhaps for the first time, that she had no control here. Not over the house. Not over Rowan. Not over us. "Rowan," I said gently, "you have a choice to make. Not about the house. About the kind of man you want to be." He swallowed hard. I need to stay somewhere else tonight. Think. Clear my head." That was the first truly adult sentence he'd spoken all evening. Lorna gasped. "You're leaving me?" "I'm leaving the situation," he corrected. "And you created it." He walked to his car slowly, heavily, and drove away without looking back. For once Lorna had no comeback. She stood trembling with indignation, then stormed off the lawn and into the dark, disappearing the same way she had entered our life, loudly and without grace. When the last echo of her heels faded, Everett let out a breath so long I thought he might deflate. "Well," he said, "on the bright side, at least she didn't ask for the garage code." I laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that loosens years of tension in a single breath. We walked inside together, shutting the door behind us with a finality that felt like peace. Not silence peace. The kind earned, not gifted. Everett poured us each a cup of tea, though he spilled half of his on the counter and blamed the mug's poor work ethic. As we sat in our living room, our home, I realized something. Tonight wasn't about losing a son or a daughter-in-law. It was about reclaiming our dignity, our boundaries, and our future. Everett took my hand and said, "You were incredible out there." And I answered honestly, "No, we were." Because in the end, we didn't just keep our home. We kept our self-respect. And that, more than any will or piece of paper, is what makes a family whole again.